All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our training this afternoon. Thank you all for being here. My name is Iris Wen. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the FRC training coordinator. We are super excited to have Maria Iriarte, senior attorney from Disability Rights California, to learn more about SSI eligibility and appeals. First, we just want to briefly talk about what the FRC does here in San Mateo County. The FRC serves families who have children with disabilities or special needs between the ages 0 to 22. We are staffed by parents and caregivers of children and young adults with disabilities, and we provide support, information, resources, and referrals. We also offer trainings, support groups, a resource binder, and a monthly newsletter. I want to give a disclaimer that the FRC is not a legal firm or legal services agency, and we cannot provide any legal advice. Any information provided by the FRC should not be considered a means of taking the place of legal advice that must be obtained through an attorney. With that, we invite you all to connect with us, and we'll put our contact info in the chat for you all. I also want to introduce our FRC team who is here with us this afternoon. We have Gabriela Diaz Santos, FRC coordinator, and Patricia Idrugo, FRC supervisor. Next, we just want to go over some housekeeping items to make sure this training runs smoothly. We will be recording this training for any families and providers who are not able to attend, so we ask for your collaboration with the following guidelines. Please mute yourself when not speaking to avoid any background noise. You can have your video on or off based on your preference and comfort level, and we invite your respect throughout this training. We are offering simultaneous interpretation in Spanish today, so if you haven't already, you can select the language that you would like to listen to this presentation in the settings bar under the globe icon and select either English or Spanish. We ask, even if you're listening in English, please select English, and this will allow you to hear the interpreter translate from Spanish to English. We will be having a Q&A portion at the end of the training. Please save your questions for the end. We encourage you to take notes and write down your questions as they come up so you don't forget them. And you can use the chat box or raise hand feature later on for questions and comments. During the Q&A, we encourage you to refrain from sharing any names or detailed information to protect your privacy and other families' privacies. And after you ask a question, we ask that you please be mindful of making some pauses to allow the interpreters enough time to translate both the question and the answer. At the end of the training, we will be distributing a survey both in English and Spanish to collect your feedback on how this training went. It will be anonymous and will help us understand how to improve our trainings for you all. And last, we will be sending a follow-up email tomorrow with the materials from this training. Okay, that's it for me, and now I'll turn it over to Disability Rights. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you again for everyone being here. Good afternoon. My name is Raymond Kwong. I'm an advocate with Disability Rights California. So with me today, we have Dylan Wilson, a colleague of mine. We'll both be supporting Maria Iriarte, our presenter today. So just a real quick overview of our agency. Disability Rights California is a statewide nonprofit agency, and we provide free legal services to people with disabilities with disability-related issues. We have attorneys and advocates throughout the state of California, with our headquarters being in Sacramento. We have an office in Fresno, office in Oakland, Los Angeles, Ontario, San Diego, and many smaller offices in between. We handle a variety of issues, from access or discrimination issue with housing, with transportation, with education, which includes special education and higher education. We also help with public health benefits, such as Medi-Cal, in-home supportive services, and Social Security overpayment issues. Within our agency, we have two separate programs: the Office of Client Rights Advocacy, or OCRA. They specialize in helping clients of the Regional Center, and our Client Assistance Program, or CAP. They specialize in helping clients of the Department of Rehab. So as As our host said, all the materials you see today will be sent to you after the end of the presentation. Feel free to use the chat function, but do keep in mind that this is being recorded, so if you write any questions in the chat, keep it general. We want to protect your privacy. And if you'd like to speak to someone from our agency, make an appointment, do an intake, I will put our phone number and our website in the chat as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. So today we're going to talk about supplemental security income, also known as SSI. It's one of a handful of programs that the Social Security Administration administers. So for example, they administer the Social Security retirement, disabled adult child benefits, widows benefits, divorced spouse benefits, Social Security disability insurance benefits. It's a really big federal agency. And today we're going to review the eligibility criteria for getting SSI. We're also going to talk about appeals. You're going to get a lot of information. And we're going to talk about getting someone to represent you, should you need to go to a hearing, perhaps. And one very helpful suggestion at the end of the presentation before we take questions, because we're going to do the questions at the end. And so we're going to spend maybe 30 minutes on just disability. So in order to get SSI, you either have to be 65 or older. If you're below the age of 65, you have to show that you're disabled. Now, I may think I'm disabled, but I may not meet the definition of disability to get SSI, and you'll see why. So disability under the age of 65. If you're 65 or older, you don't have to show that you're disabled to apply for this program. We're going to talk about income. We're going to talk about resources. You don't have to have any income to apply for this program, but if you do, that could affect your SSI. Resources, you don't have to have any resources, but if you do, that could affect your SSI. We're going to talk about qualified alien status to apply for SSI. You have to be a California resident to apply for SSI in California. I'm going to talk about some responsibilities that you have as a recipient of SSI, briefly about applying, briefly about appeals and representation. So let's say that I submit my application for SSI. I go to the local SSI, a Social Security office. I give them my application with all the documents, medical evidence I think will help them determine whether I'm disabled or not. Now, what's going to happen is that the Social Security Administration is going to determine whether I qualify based on income, resources, qualified alien status, am I a California resident? Social Security will not establish will not determine whether I'm disabled or not. That is another agency, and that agency is called the Disability Determination Services. It is a state agency. So at some time, my application and paperwork is going to be sent to Disability Determination Services. And an analyst is going to be assigned. Sorry. And that analyst at some point is going to make a disability determination. So I've given you information on the DDS. The analyst may find that there's not enough in the file and may ask me to undergo a consultative exam. The analyst may also send inquiries to the doctors and providers I've listed in my application, trying to get more information. What I'm going to do after maybe a couple of weeks is call Social Security and find out if my paperwork is with DDS. And when they tell me that it is, I'm going to ask, well, what office? And they say it's a Sacramento. So I've got information here on the Sacramento office. I'm going to call that office. I'm going to ask to speak to the analyst because I want to help the analyst get everything he or she needs in order to make a favorable disability determination. The analyst may say to me, well, look, Maria, I've asked Dr. X for information. I haven't heard from her. I'll say, wait, I can get that information from you. Let me do that. I'm going to try to do what I can so that when this analyst is ready to make that disability determination, she has everything she needs. So this is the list that you have. So we're going to talk about the definitions of disability, and I'm going to talk about two concepts: presumptive eligibility and compassionate allowances. You have all of the links to all of the material, and you're going to get the material anyway. So the definition of disability for an adult, anyone 18 or older, is very different from the definition of a child disability. So to be disabled as an adult, you have to show that you cannot engage in what is called substantial gainful activity because of your disabilities, and that your disabilities are going to last at least 12 consecutive months or lead to your death. What is substantial gainful activity? It's a dollar amount. So for 2023, if you work and earn $1,470 gross a month, you're working substantial gainful activity. If you're someone who's applying based on blindness, your substantial gainful activity amount is greater. It's $2,460. So to be considered disabled under the definition of disability, you have to show that you cannot engage and earn for example, $470 gross a month. The definition of a child disability is really based on whether the disability causes marked and severe functional limitations, and that it's the disabilities are going to cause the death of the child or last at least 12 continuous months. There are children who receive SSI, and when they turn 18, they get a letter from Social Security saying, we're going to reevaluate whether you continue to be disabled. And it's possible that the next letter that they get will be, you're no longer disabled. We get the calls from the parents saying, usually the parents saying, I don't understand. The only thing that happened to my child is that he turned 18. His condition hasn't changed. So I don't understand why now they say he's not disabled. Well, because the definition of disability changed. It's now for an adult based on the ability to work. And let me just say right now, very clear, that just because you have a disability does not mean that you cannot work. There are many people out in the community who are disabled and who are working. And when we go through the sequential analysis that the analyst has to do to determine whether the person can work or not, is disabled or not, you'll see why it's possible that I may have disabilities, but I may be able to work and I may not be found disabled. Now, just because Social Security says I'm not disabled, it doesn't mean that they're always right. So if you get a notice like that, then you've got two options. You either appeal or you don't appeal, right? So, and we'll talk about appeals. The other definition, and I've given you the substantial gainful activity amounts for this year. It'll change next year. There, as you can see, the numbers go up. And so the definition of someone who's applying for blindness, whether it be a child or an adult, is whether they're statutorily blind. And the definition is here. I'm not going to read it, but it's here for you. So presumptive disability, there are some disabilities where Social Security says, more likely than not, we're going to find this person disabled. So let's start giving them the benefit, the SSI, for up to 6 months while the analyst at DDS makes that final decision as to whether that person is disabled. What happens if the analyst then says, no, that person's not disabled? Does that person have to give the money back? No. So what are those conditions? They're here, like amputation at the leg, of the leg at the hip, allegation of total blindness, total deafness, allegation of cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, with marked difficulty in walking, speaking, coordinating of hands and arms, allegation of Down syndrome, allegation of, for example, autism spectrum disorder with a complete inability to independently perform self-care activities made by someone who's filing this application who's at least 4 years old. There are other categories based on weight at birth. For example, if you have end-stage renal disease or Lou Gehrig's disease. So if I meet any of these disabilities, then I may start getting my benefit right away under presumptive eligibility. The other one is compassionate allowances. Now, these are conditions where they will find you disabled. So let's say, for example, I have acute leukemia. I click on acute leukemia and I meet the conditions under acute leukemia. Then what's going to happen is that the analyst is going to make a very quick disability determination. There are a lot of conditions. Social Security is always looking for new conditions to add to the list of compassionate allowances. So it's possible that my application may be processed rather quickly, you know, for disability based on meeting the compassionate allowances list. Obviously, disability is only a factor. Remember, we have other things we have to meet, like income, resources, qualified alien status. So anyway, so you've got the links to all of this. You can always look it up. So once the analyst is ready to decide whether I'm disabled, there's a sequential analysis that happens. And so what is it? So the first question the analyst will ask is Maria working at substantial gainful activity? Because if I'm working and earning $1,470, I am not disabled. End of analysis. I'm going to get that notice saying, Maria, we have found that you are not disabled. Okay. And then my two choices are leave it alone or appeal. But let's say I'm not working substantial gainful activity. The next question the analyst will ask, and by the way, this first question can be asked of a child too, because remember, a child is anyone below the age of 18. So if you're 16, 17 and you're working, they're going to ask this question of the child applicant. Same for step 2, child and adults. Is your condition severe enough? Is it expected to lead to your death or last at least 12 continuous months? Let's say that my condition does meet that it's severe enough. And then the next question the analyst will ask is, for both children and adults, is your condition on Social Security's list of impairments? So there's the list of impairments, and I'm going to take you to what it looks like on the website. If my conditions are in the list of impairments, then I will be found disabled, and that's the end of the analysis. But if my condition is not in the listing of impairments, then the analyst needs to ask questions 4 and maybe even questions 5 of the sequential analysis. So this is what it looks like when you get into it's called in the Blue Book, there's the listing of impairments. That's why you see Blue Book here. So there's an adult listings of impairment and childhood listing of impairments. And this is the adult listing of impairments. And let's say that my issue is digestive in nature. So I would click on digestive system. And if my impairment is there at the severity necessary, then I meet the listing of impairments. Same for if the child's impairments do not meet the listing of impairments, then the analyst is going to look at domains, and I'm going to talk about that a little later. So let's go back to the sequential analysis. Sorry to have to do. So let's say that my condition is not meet the listing of impairments in the Blue Book. Now I have to go to step number 4. And the analyst will ask, can Maria do the same work she did before? If I can do the same work I did before with reasonable accommodations, then I'm not disabled. I could not, so I use my computer all the time to work. And let's say I can't use my hands anymore to use the computer. Well, if my employer provides me with reasonable accommodations, the software and hardware necessary to do my work without using my hands, and it does exist, I can do the same work I did before, and therefore I will not be found disabled. But let's say that I can't do the same work I did before. So then what happens? The last step, and this is where it gets a little tricky, because at this step, and maybe even the prior step, The analyst may be working with a vocational rehab expert, and that person is going to look at my file. And based on my age, my education, my skills, my functional residual capacities, both physical and mental, that woke rehab person may say, well, you know, Maria can't do the work she did before, but she can do these other 10 jobs, despite the fact that she can't use her hands, right? And so I'm going to get a letter from the analyst or Social Security actually saying we're not going to approve the application because you weren't found disabled. I have two choices. I can leave it alone or I can appeal. If I appeal and I go to a hearing, really my job at the hearing, or an attorney or someone who can represent me, will be to convince the judge that I can't work. I can't even do the 10 jobs that the vocational rehab expert says I can do. So you see how just because you have a disability doesn't mean that you're going to be found disabled under the Social Security rules. And like I said before, sometimes Social Security makes a mistake. They make mistakes. Analysts make the mistakes. So don't take them at their word. If you really feel strongly about your case, maybe you should consult with people who do this. There are people out there, attorneys and non-attorneys, who help people establish Social Security benefits. Consult with them to see if you really have a strong case or not. They'll be able to tell you, because they'll only take cases where they think they will win, because they only get paid their fees if they win your case. So I've included a couple of publications on the use of vocational experts. The first one comes from what's called the Program Operations Manual System. If you go onto the Social Security website and you search POMS, these are like the rules that the Social Security representatives and guidelines that they follow in doing their work. And so this one happens to talk about the use of vocational experts. And this is just the first page of this publication. You can find it there. But I like this one better, the Vocational Expert Handbook, because it really talks about who's the vocational expert, who's the judge, what happens at the hearing, the different levels of appeal. How does a vocational expert get prepared for the hearing? What happens at the hearing? We just went through the sequential analysis. And so, you know, you're going to want to look at this if you have to appeal and go to a hearing. And then this is the Blue Book listing of impairments. It's just the front page. Now, if the child's conditions doesn't meet the listing of impairments, remember I talked about the fact that the analyst is going to look at domains. And what are those domains that they're going to look at? Well, we're going to go briefly through them. You're going to be able to look at all of this. How does a child acquire and use information? How does a child attend and complete tasks? How does the child interact and relate to others? How does the child move objects? They're really looking at the gross and fine motor skills. How does the child care for him or herself? And a general category of health and physical well-being. And so what I would do if I were a parent and I was applying on behalf of my child for SSI with the application, I would of course include documents that speak to these areas, because if my child's disability or disabilities do not meet the listing of impairments, then the analyst needs to look at these domains. And where is the information that addresses these domains? It could be in the IEP and the IPP and medical records. So the more information you give the analyst, the better. Of course, useful information, right? Sometimes people just give information without reading what they're giving and making sure that the information they're giving to someone is consistent throughout. Sometimes they give information where one document says one thing, the other document says something else. And so who's the analyst to believe, right? Who's the judge to believe when you have conflicting information from different sources? These next forms are no longer on the Social Security website. I don't know what happened to the forms, but I think they're really important. If I were applying, I would still have my doctor fill these forms out, because these forms talk about my physical residual capacity and my mental residual capacity to work. So for example, exertional limitations. Can Maria occasionally lift and carry less than 10 pounds, 10 pounds, 20 pounds, etc.? Frequently lift or carry. Now, one thing, if I were to give this form to my doctor, she wouldn't know how to fill it out, because I never talked to her about this. She wouldn't know. So if I'm going to have her fill it out, I'm going to be there with her so she could ask me these questions. And it's possible that the only thing I can do is lift 10 pounds for 5 minutes, and then my wrists start to swell and hurt. So not only would my doctor check off less than 10 pounds, but she would also write next to this, Maria can carry 10 pounds for 5 minutes, but then her wrists swell and become painful. Because that's really the true story, the whole truth, right? It's not just less than 10 pounds, it's less than that, really. How standing or walking? Can I stand or walk less than 2 hours in an 8-hour workday? Sit, push and pull. More information for the doctor to put in. Postural limitations, climb, balance, stoop. You see how all of these go towards work activity. Manipulative limitations, reach in all directions, fingering, feeling, visual limitations, communicative limitations of hearing and speaking, environmental limitations. And someone who can work in extreme cold, extreme heat, humidity, noise, vibrations, fumes, all really important. Now, really, because if the analyst has to go to 4 and especially 5 of the sequential analysis, the analyst needs this information to know what my physical residual capacity is to do jobs. Now, there's a similar form for my mental residual capacity, and it talks about my ability to understand and memorize. Do I have the ability to remember locations and work-like procedures? What about under sustained concentration and persistence? Do I have the ability to maintain attention and concentration for extended periods? The ability to make simple work-related decisions? What about social interaction? And am I able to appropriately interact with the general public? What about adaptation? Do I have the ability to respond appropriately to changes in work-like setting? And more, there's a lot of space for the doctor to put things down. So, it's really important. And if you're not comfortable using these forms because they're no longer on the Social Security website, just have the doctor or have the doctor's office fill out, provide the same information in the form in a letter format. It's that easy. Okay, so we've talked about disability. That's one criterion for getting SSI if you're below the age of 65. Now let's talk about income. And you notice here that I put countable income because the SSI program will never count gross income. There will always be deductions to gross income to get to countable income, because countable income is what counts. It'll either, it could affect your ability to even get SSI if you're above too much, if you have too much countable income, or it could affect the amount of SSI you get. And I'll give you an example of that. I'm also going to talk about deeming. So what's income? So for SSI, income can be income from earnings, even self-employment, unearned income, if you're getting other pensions, other Social Security benefits, workers' comp, unemployment, state disability. Someone gives you cash, that's a form of unearned income. In-kind income, if you're an adult living with other people, it doesn't matter that you're living with family. the SSI program expects you to meet your fair share of food and shelter. And if you're not meeting your fair share of food and or shelter, then the program's going to say, well, you know, you live with people who are helping you meet your food and shelter expenses, and that has a dollar value. And they apply one of two formulas. And that dollar amount gets deducted from the amount of SSI you would get every month. And that's called in-kind support and maintenance. And there's a really good publication, and Raymond will put the link to that publication from Justice and Aging on in-kind support and maintenance. I would say that if you really want, I think everyone should understand this concept because it could affect many people, to read about it and you know, if you have any questions after that, you can always get a hold of us, or you can get a hold of Justice and Aging about in-kind support and maintenance. There's another kind of income called deemed income. So if I'm a minor below the age of 18 and I'm applying for SSI, the income and even resources of the parent with whom I live will be counted, will be deemed as if they were mine. And it might disqualify me for SSI or reduce my SSI amount. Now, I, as a child, may have my own income and resources. So for example, if I'm receiving child support, 2/3 of that child support is income to me as a child. I may have resources. Someone may have left me an inheritance, who knows? So deemed income is from a parent with whom you're living. Also, if I'm married and I apply for SSI, my spouse's income and resources will be deemed to me, will count as if it were mine, and it can affect my eligibility or the amount of SSI I'm getting. The other type of deeming is sponsor deeming. So if my sister signed a document with the federal government saying that for me to become a lawful permanent resident, she would be my sponsor. She would support me and make sure I wasn't a public charge to the federal government. Well, at some point I apply for SSI. It's possible that my sister's income and resources and her spouse's income and resources could be deemed to me. So these are the different kinds of income, but not everything counts as income. So if you have any unearned income, they're going to deduct $20 from your total unearned income, and that becomes your accountable income. If you're working, what they do is they take your gross income, they deduct $65, divide that by half, and that becomes your accountable earned income. There are other deductions you could do to earnings, and there's a really good book that talks about those other deductions, like impairment-related work expenses or blind work expenses. You can find that information in what's called the Red Book, and Raymond will put the link to the Red Book in the chat. Other things that are not counted as income are income tax refunds, home energy assistance, loans that you have to repay are not considered income. This is just a list. It's not exhaustive of all the things that are not considered income. If you have any questions about what could be considered income or not, and you're not quite sure, you can reach out to us or another organization that does assess Social Security work. You can, I hesitate to say this, but you know, you could call Social Security and ask them the question. You know, sometimes the answer is correct, sometimes it's not. So that's why I hesitate to say reach out to them. But there are people at the Social Security Administration who know their job and would give you the right answer, but I can't vouch for everyone because I've heard stories in the last 20 years. And so the end of this publication just tells you how to reach countable income if you have earned or unearned income. So let me show you, and there's some information here on deeming. So every year, SSI comes out in California, comes out with this publication. So there's one that's going to come out in 2024, and it shows you what the amounts of SSI are. Now, not everyone gets the same amount of SSI. It depends on a number of factors. What your living status is. Are you considered independent living, or are you considered living in the household of another? Are you a minor child? If so, are you living with a parent, or are you considered living in the household of another? Are you living in a board and care situation? Are you an independent living status with no cooking facilities? Are you someone who's getting SSI based on blindness, or are you getting SSI based on any other disability? So you see the different amounts based on the different categories. Independent living status doesn't mean that you live alone. You could be living with other people, but for example, you have rental liability, you're on the rental agreement. That would make you be considered independent living status. Now, I want to show you how countable income works. Let's say that I'm going to be placed in independent living status. I'm not getting SSI based on blindness. So my monthly amount will be $1,133.73. But let's say that I have countable income, both unearned income and earned income. And after all of those deductions, my countable earned and unearned income is $1,200. But the most I would get with SSI is $1,133.73. Am I going to get any SSI? No, because my countable income is more than what I would get in SSI. So when my countable income exceeds the amount I would get in SSI, I do not qualify for SSI. Let me give you another example. Let's say that my countable earned and unearned income is $1,100. Am I going to get any SSI? Yes, and the way that the program's going to do it is they're going to take what I would get, which is $1,133.73. They're going to deduct my countable income of $1,100. The remainder, $33.73, is what I'm going to get in SSI. And as long as I get at least $1 of SSI, I'm going to get my full scope Medi-Cal. And that's really important because sometimes people they're more concerned about the Medi-Cal than they are getting the SSI. I just want you to know that getting SSI is only one way to get Medi-Cal. There are many Medi-Cal programs in the state of California. And if you lose your SSI, doesn't mean that you're going to lose your Medi-Cal necessarily. So these are the different amounts for 2023. Notice I put countable resource. So this is the third criterion. We've talked about disability, we talked about income. Now let's talk about resources. Like I said early on, you don't have to have any resources to qualify for this program, but if you do, you need to know the rules. And countable, meaning that the program is not going to count everything you have. But let's just look generally at what resources can be: cash, bank accounts, land, life insurance, personal property, including vehicles, deemed resources, just like they deem income, deem resources. Okay, so what are the resource limits? For an adult, it's $2,000. You can't have more than $2,000 in countable resources. For a couple applying for SSI, you can't have more than $3,000 in countable resources. Children get a little bit more based on how many parents are in the household. So, and here are the resource limits. So, but like I said, countable resources means not everything is counted as a resource. So the home that you own and live in is not counted as a resource. So here in California, you could be living in a bungalow that's worth $3 million. It won't be counted as a resource. Doesn't matter. A vehicle you can have one vehicle, doesn't matter what the value of that vehicle is. Your household goods and personal effects won't matter. Wedding rings and engagement rings don't matter, but if you have any other jewelry, that matters. For example, and these are just examples, it's not the whole list, but I do want to point to the ABLE. Here in California, there's a program called CalAble, and we're going to put the link on in the chat. If you open up an ABLE account and you're getting SSI, you can keep up to $100,000 in that ABLE account, and it will not affect your eligibility for SSI. And you can use that money towards qualified disability expenses. And the definition of qualified disability expenses is so broad. You can buy a home, modify a home. You can, educate yourself. You could travel. You can hire an attorney. You can buy a gym membership. You're not limited to the $2,000 limit, which is the general SSI rule. So if you're interested in the ABLE account, I would recommend that you go to that website and learn more about the ABLE account. I do a training on this. It's almost a 2-hour training. But I just want to briefly mention it because it is my favorite program, and wherever I can plug it, I do. And so other things that don't count as resources. Now, a lot of times with the SSI program, there's not a yes or no answer. It depends. There's a lot of it depends answers because, it depends on your situation. It depends on whether there are exceptions. So if you are not quite sure about something, it's better that you find out before you do something. So if you buy a resource, it's possible that it could be, it's not counted, or it's possible that it is. And if it's counted, it may bump you out of the program because now you're over-resourced. If you sell a resource for less than market value, you're going to be dinged. Your SSI will be suspended for a while, I think up to 36 months. So you have to be very careful with resources. Now, the general rule is that money is considered income in the month you get it. Whatever is left over that goes into the following month converts into a resource. This is really important. I've had cases where the person has been saving money and they keep some money for the following month, and they're saving and they've become over-resourced very soon. 5 years later, they get a letter from SSI saying, hey, you were over-resourced for the last 5 years and you didn't tell us. Well, guess what? We're going to suspend your SSI and you're going to have to pay all of that back. So remember, the general rule is money is considered income in the month you get it, and whatever is left, the next month becomes a resource. There are certain situations where you're going to be allowed to more time to spend that money down so it doesn't become a resource that affects you. We have a publication on our webpage. It's for SSI payments and lump sum payments. So for example, if you get a retroactive Social Security award, IHSS award, if you get an inheritance, if you win the lottery, you need to know how much time you have before that income becomes a resource. So we're going to put the link to that publication in chat too. Really important. Now we've talked about disability, we've talked about income and resources, and now we're going to talk about qualified alien status. I'm not an immigration expert, but when I was working cases and I had a case where immigration was the issue to become eligible for a benefit, I would reach out to an organization called the National Immigration Law Center. They have attorneys who know both the immigration end and the benefits end. And so we would work together on cases. There are 7 categories of qualified aliens, and these are it. I just want to say something about lawful permanent residents. When you become a lawful permanent resident, you cannot apply for SSI for at least the first 5 years after becoming a lawful permanent resident. It is the federal law. However, in California, there's a program called the Cash Assistance Program for Immigrants, and we'll put the link on chat. If you're in that situation, or also in there are other immigration statuses that could allow you to get CAPI, you could get a money benefit while you're waiting those 5 years to be able to apply for SSI. So these are the, refugee admitted under Section 207, a parolee under Section 212 of the Immigration Naturalization Act, or if your deportation was withheld pursuant to a specific section of the Immigration and Nationalization Act. Sometimes, and there are categories of people who can get SSI for a maximum of 7 years, and then they go to CAPI. So it's the reverse of the SSI people. The SSI people have to wait 5 years. They can possibly get CAPI during that time, and then they can apply for SSI. Well, there are categories of people, refugees, asylees, who can get it for 7 years, and then they can apply for CAPI. And then there are some special categories of people, victims of severe forms of human trafficking, special eligibility for Iraqis and Afghanistanis, and Ukraine humanitarian parolees. That's qualified alien status. One thing about immigration, if you have any concerns about whether receiving a public benefit may affect your ability to become a lawful permanent resident, you need to talk to an immigration attorney. They're the only ones who are going to be able, after you've consulted with them and given them all the facts, they're the only ones who are going to be able to tell you with certainty what can happen, if anything. I want to talk about responsibilities. This is a publication from Social Security. Your rights, you can read about them, but I'm really concerned about the responsibilities, because SSI, Supplemental Security Income, it's a needs-based program. So there's a lot of information that can affect either your eligibility for SSI, your continued eligibility for SSI, or the amount of SSI that you get. So when you get on SSI, you will get, as part of your notice, it'll tell you what your responsibilities are for reporting changes in your situation. So for example, if someone moves into your household, if you start working, if your income changes, if your spouse's income changes, if you're a minor, if your parents' income changes, if their parents start working, if you return to work, if you stop working, changes in resources, if you're getting help with living expenses from friends and relatives, if your spouse dies or someone else in your household dies, if you get married, separated, or divorced, if you change your name, if you start becoming eligible for other payments, because that's going to affect your eligibility for SSI or the amount that you get. If you enter into an institution, because while you're in an institution, generally you're not eligible for SSI. There's an exception where you're in like a hospital, but your intention is to return to your home. If you leave the States for 30 consecutive days, you're not entitled to SSI for that month. Your SSI can be suspended. School, if your school attendance changes, if your immigration status changes. So there are a lot of reporting requirements, a lot of situations. And so if you don't report something that would have affected your eligibility or the amount of SSI that you get, down the line, you might get a letter from SSI saying, hey, we found out that, you've been working for the last 5 years and you didn't tell us about this, and based on what you earned every month, you were not eligible for any SSI. And guess what? We're terminating your SSI, and you need to pay that back. I was doing a legal clinic out in one of these counties here in Southern California, and it was an elderly couple, and they had been receiving SSI for the last 20 years. They got a letter 20 years later from the SSI program saying, hey, We found that you have property in Mexico that you never reported. This is 20 years later. And sure enough, it was true. And so what happened to them? Their SSI was terminated. They were they got an overpayment notice. So they were told that they had to pay all that SSI that they had received for 20 years. They had to pay that back. I don't know how that was going to happen because that was their only source of income. And there was another possibility. I never knew what happened because it was just counsel and advice at that clinic. SSI could start a fraud investigation. So my best advice to you is when you're disclosing things, earnings and resources, you need to be truthful, because down the line, this may happen and you don't want to find yourself in that situation. They have ways of finding things out sooner or later. So applying for SSI, various ways. You can apply online. You can call Social Security and make an appointment and have a representative assist you. You could download the application, fill it out, and take it into your local office. That's what I would do, because I want time to be able to sit down and read it and make sure I fill it out properly. So different ways to do it. And you'll get this. Appeals. So this is, I think this is a really nice publication from Social Security about the appeals process. Okay, so there are 4 levels, 4 opportunities to appeal. If I was denied SSI because I was found not to be disabled and I file a reconsideration, another analyst at DDS is going to review the file to determine whether the first analyst was correct or not. If I was denied SSI because of immigration status, income, resources, or I'm not a California resident, then someone else at Social Security will review the file to determine whether the first Social Security rep was correct or not. Let's say that I'm denied my reconsideration. Then my next level of appeal will be before a judge. If I lose at that level, then I can ask for a review by the appeals council. And if I lose at that level, I could go to federal court. Believe me, you don't want to get there. You want to try to do the best job possible with the application. But if you're denied, I would highly recommend that you consult with someone who does this what we call establishment cases. This is all they do. They help people get on Social Security benefits. Consult with them. Usually the consultation is free, to see if you have a good case. Because if you have a good case, they're going to want to take your case, because they get paid their fees if they win your case. Now, this publication goes into more detail about the different levels of appeal, and you're going to be able to read all about it and how much time you have to appeal and what forms you have to use, about the hearings, about the appeals council, about federal court. Let's talk about representation. This is also another publication from Social Security. So you can have an attorney represent you at a hearing, or a non-attorney. Non-attorneys do this kind of work too. And like I said, they get paid fees if they win your case. If they do not win your case at the hearing level, they do not get fees. So what happens? These attorneys are looking for good cases. So if you're looking for an attorney, then you need to sell your case to the attorney. So when you meet with this attorney, you're going to want to bring all the documents you think are important for the attorney to look at, right? I was doing this training, and one of the participants said, "Oh, I found an attorney and he's charging me $5,000 to go to hearing." And I said, he can't do that. He can't get paid a fee unless he wins the case. who am I to say I mean, you know, I just told her what it was and she decides what she wants to do with that information, but no one can charge you a fee ahead of time to represent you at a hearing. Sometimes they can ask for more than 25% of a retroactive award, because by the time you from the time you apply to the time that you go to a hearing, 1 or 2 years may have gone by. And if you win your case from, you know, 2 years after applying, you're going to get a hefty retroactive award. So these people get paid from that retroactive award, 25%. If they want any more than that, they have to petition Social Security and explain to Social Security why this case was so complicated, why they need to get 33% or more, whatever it is they're asking. Now, I want to just differentiate fees from costs. Let's say that I find someone to take my case to hearing, and this person calls me and says, Maria, we need you to be examined by Dr. Y. And Dr. Y has to write a report and Dr. Y has to testify at the hearing. And that's going to cost $5,000. And I say, what? And my insurance won't pay for it. And so that's a cost of the case. It's not a fee. The attorney earns a fee for the work that the attorney does. This is paying an expert to be my expert at a hearing, to examine me and write a report. That's money that comes out of my pocket. That's a cost. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to happen in your case, that you're going to have to spend a lot of money to get to a hearing, but it's possible. I don't like people to be surprised, you know, like, I thought you only get paid a fee if you win, and you didn't win. Well, fees and costs are different, right? The other thing that I want to show you is, and these are questions that you could read. I'd rather spend more time answering questions, but there's something really important here that I want to point out. If you're having any problems with Social Security, then what you can do is contact your U.S. congressperson in your district. I'm looking for it. And initiate what is called a congressional inquiry. So we're going to go ahead. I'm going to show you how to look up your U.S. congressperson. So Raymond, if you want to bring it up, we're going to give you the link so you could find out. So find your U.S. congressperson, just type in a zip code. Okay. So turns out my congressperson is Sarah Jacobs. So we're going to go to her website. She says she's here to help us. So let's go up to services up on the right-hand corner where it says services. First says about, and then it's, yes, there we go. And then help with a federal agency. We scroll down to help, because the Social Security Administration is a federal agency. So is the Veterans Administration, right? So help with a federal agency. And then it tells you, you know, you're gonna sign a release and they're gonna have you fill out a form, and then you submit it, and then they'll contact you and they're going to learn about your issue, and then they're going to, they have people within Social Security who help U.S. Congress people with issues that their constituents have. Just an example of a case I had where a father had gone to the Social Security Administration about an issue, and he had gotten all kinds of answers, different answers about the same issue. So he came to us and I said, no, what you did was correct. And I said, look, let's just file for a hearing. But in the meantime, I want you to contact your U.S. congressperson, because I want them to help us set up a meeting, a phone call with someone at Social Security who knows this issue. And indeed, that's what happened. We had a call with someone at Social Security about the issue. And the guy, after he heard and looked at the file and everything, he said, you know what, you're right. What you did was correct. We owe your son money because we were dinging his SSI for all this time. And we're going to go ahead and give him his complete benefit. So his son was going to get a retro award, was going to get his full benefit back. And we didn't have to go to hearing. We bypassed the hearing by getting the problem solved through a conversation with someone at Social Security who knew what we were talking about the issue. And I've had other clients I've referred to their US Congress people, and I've heard good things. I've never heard anyone say to me, oh, they didn't help me, you know, they were helpless, hopeless. I haven't. So, you know, based on my own work and hearing other clients, they're, you know, using their US Congressperson has been helpful. So I've come to the end of the presentation and happy to answer questions.
I appreciate you, Maria, for the training and all the information and the wisdom and the experience you share with the families here and the providers.
Sure. Well, thank you. Happy holidays to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. And we hope to see you at one of our next trainings. Thank you.